Season 2 of World of Warcraft Dragonflight is here. That means new dungeons, a new raid, and much more on the horizon. So, to celebrate, I thought I would take a look back and review Season 1 to see how much I enjoyed it and what I think could be better. Obviously, everything here will be based on my personal interactions and experiences. So don't take anything too seriously and just have some fun. I've always wanted to do long form review content, so I figured now would be the perfect time to start branching into this new form. And with that, let's move on to the review. Dragonflight Season 1 began on the week of December 12th, 2022. After 2 weeks of leveling, mythic dungeons, world quests, and world events, it was time to start the race to 2000 score for Keystone Master. Deciding my main was easy, as I've played Marksmanship Hunter since Legion, but there were other classes that interested me. Throughout the season, I played Marksmanship Hunter at the level of Mythic 20s, along with Vengeance and Havoc Demon Hunter, Devastation Evoker, and Arms Warrior at the Mythic 15 level. I even began to play both Restoration and Elemental Shaman, as I want to play them in Season 2.
This is my boomstick!
As a Marksmanship main, I loved the class in AoE Burst. But as usual, single target viability was lacking. Talents such as Explosive Shot, Salvo, and True Shot made cooldown windows very impressive. As I was most familiar with this class previously, it felt comfortable and easy to handle the rotation. However, in higher keys, I felt like I was constantly out of defensive options when a mass amount of damage was ready to go out, requiring me to rely solely on my healer for help.
I'm vengeance.
While I don't claim to be the best at tanking, I did feel that Vengeance felt very strong in AoE damage, but single target damage felt a little bit better than it had in previous seasons, thanks to talents made to increase the damage of Soul Cleave in single target situations. Defensively, I felt that the self-healing was less than I was expecting, but while in Metamorphosis, I felt unkillable. Overall, it was fun. However, I didn't play it as much as I originally thought I would.
I'm blind, not deaf.
What to say? To be honest, I thought I was going to hate this class because for higher Mythic Plus, you were almost forced into the momentum build if you wanted to keep up in DPS. However, I had no problem with that because the build ended up being extremely fun once I got the hang of things. There was always something I could do, trying to keep up momentum uptime, or actually using Throw Glaive for damage, something I never thought would happen.
One time I sneezed inside a cheese shop. That's how I discovered my love for fondue.
When the new class and race was announced, I was ecstatic. I absolutely love dragons, and the thought of playing one had me thinking that it may take over as my new main. Obviously that didn't happen, but I still enjoyed myself, especially in massive AoE situations. It felt very rewarding being able to extend Dragon Rage through getting the empowered spells in before the cooldown ran out, and it made me have to think about different prioritizations. While single target did feel weak at first, buffs to Disintegrate made it more bearable once they came out. What can I say about Arms Warrior? Well, I know that the first month I played the class, I exclusively ran Algathar Academy because I took every talent that buffed my AoE capabilities. Not worrying about my boss damage because that was for people other than me to do. Yes, I do know that Arms, under the right build, can be very broken in single target, but I never played that build. It felt amazing to out-DPS people 30 item levels higher than me in large trash packs, only to be humbled when I did 20k on the next boss fight.
Raindrops keep falling on my head.
I really can't speak on either of these. However, they are pretty easy to get the handle of. And not only did healing Elemental/Resto Shaman. I can't speak on either of these, however they are pretty easy to get a handle on, and still the only healing class I've ever played past level 40. Acid Rain damage was pretty fun while it lasted, and it's still good now, just not broken. And at this point, I decided that maybe it shouldn't just be me writing about this, and I invited a special guest. While he is my brother, he may be better known here as Nolid. I think he would know more about the next couple classes than I ever could. So while recording, my brother actually moved out and said he didn't want to record his lines, but wanted me to read them instead. So here goes.
Raindrops keep falling on my head.
Resto Shaman is very good. Receiving buffs during Dragonflight to Acid Rain increased the passive damage of Resto Shaman greatly. The current Chain Heal build is very simple and provides a lot of HPS output. A lot of buttons for utility, so setting up keybinds was overwhelming.
Side effects may include dry mouth, nausea, vomiting, water retention, painful rectal itch, hallucination, dementia, psychosis, coma, death, and halitosis.
At the beginning of the expansion, it felt very hard to keep up with some of the healing checks, but after our atonement got buffed and I started playing the Shadow Covenant Squid build, it was fun. Still challenging to single target heal, but with the addition of Power Word Life, it isn't as bad now.
I know you.
Button Float. Very overwhelming to play at first, but after a week, I got the hang of it. All your buttons light up at the same time, and it was difficult to figure out which to hit first, while also keeping an eye out for overcapping insanity. Overall, very fun spec to play. The only DPS I have ever played in 20s, and I had a great time. Words by Nolid. I was very put off by the choice to only use half of the new Dragonflight dungeons. I mean, why would you create and release 8 new dungeons only to push half of them to the side for almost half a year? Although I still have problems with that choice, I do think the legacy dungeons they chose were very fun, along with the 4 Dragonflight dungeons that were kept for Season 1. I wasn't really sure how to go about talking about the dungeons, so I decided to rank them from worst to best. Obviously, my personal opinion. Number 8. In last place, we have the Azure Vault. The first boss always seemed to give people trouble, not to mention Azure Blade. I do think the ability to create different routes based on affixes and whether you wanted to kill the frogs or not is a very fun aspect, but aside from that, nothing really was too fun about this dungeon. And I do think that it's a problem when the best part of the dungeon is figuring out how to avoid different trash packs because they're annoying to fight. Number 7. I don't know why, but even though it was the dungeon I got KSM from, Halls of Valor was never fun to me. The bosses hit hard, and there were very punishing trash mobs, making the entire dungeon feel like there's never any break. However, I do find the mechanics of the bosses themselves to be much more enjoyable, even if they are harder than the ones found in Azure Vault. Number 6. What to say about the Temple of the Jade Serpent? The first hallway is a make-or-break part of the key, so right off the bat, you gotta white-knuckle the keyboard. Another thing I don't like about the dungeon is that it's necessary to have a curse dispel at high levels, restricting the team composition. The saving grace is that the dungeon is so short that it doesn't feel like a commitment as much as the others. And the last boss is very satisfying to kill and burst down the shades. Number 5. I had a hard time deciding between numbers 4 and 5, as both dungeons are quite fun, but both also have drawbacks that hold them back from being in the top 3. Ultimately, I decided to go with Ruby Life Pools at the number 5 spot. First hallway is always a fun challenge to see how much you can pull and survive, but the bosses were so unnecessarily difficult on tyrannical weeks. The first boss's shield could take way too long to break through, and let's not mention the nightmare of the second boss. Why this isn't lower on the list is because even though the bosses were very hard, they had some very creative mechanics that felt satisfying to do correctly. Number 4. As stated previously, I had a hard time deciding between this dungeon and Ruby Life Pools, but the Nakud offensive just barely edged it out by simply having dragon riding. Dragon riding has to be one of the most fun things about Dragonflight, if not the most fun. While the instance is just the Onaran Plains again, the fact that we can fly around in a dungeon with full control is just amazing. Yeah, the trash and the bosses can hit really hard, but it feels like one of the most satisfying experiences once you reach completion. Number 3. Even though it was my first time 15 and 20 of the season, when I went to do the ranking, I couldn't find any aspects of Shadowmoon Burial Grounds that I could say were better than the two above it, except for the difficulty. Although I think this dungeon is almost too easy, it was a nice dungeon that could ease you into the higher keys. The trash was nothing to write home about, and I think Bone Maw was a terribly boring boss who took way too long. But Nalish was very satisfying with the damage buff after recovering your soul, and Ner'zhul is always a heart-pumping experience, especially if you decide to risk it and kill before the Ritual of Bones closes in on you. I think this dungeon could have been improved by a slightly tighter timer, but it still manages its way into the top 3 of this season. Number 2. Our runner-up is a dungeon I spent over an hour and a half in once because I went in as an undergeared tank with guildies. While none of you know about that, I'm surprised that Court of Stars ended up so high on my list. I think the main reasons I ended up enjoying this dungeon so much, even though there was a lack of AoE possibilities, are the various buffs found around the dungeon. Alchemists and rogues make the first boss incredibly easy, and the random buffs in the courtyard provide a nice set of buffs for the group as long as people can use the ones that are available. The best part about those buffs is that they're not required. And this goes without saying, but the visuals are gorgeous. It's too bad you hardly get to appreciate them while in the dungeon. Number 1. The stat buffs at the beginning, the absurd ability to pull large packs, and the interesting boss mechanics all come together to form Algathar Academy. Although I never pushed it super high, it was no doubt the most fun I had in a dungeon. I love AoE damage and seem to gravitate towards classes that thrive in those situations. Specifically, the overgrown ancient boss fight was very entertaining, and it always helps seeing those big numbers when it's over. This dungeon was also the only Dragonflight dungeon that genuinely impressed me in aesthetics upon first viewing. Obviously, I later began to find things I enjoyed about all the others. While I feel that some dungeons had some aspects that were better than Algathar Academy, overall, the best experience in a dungeon this season for me was Algathar Academy. Vault of the Incarnates. As one of 3 raids I achieved AOTC in, and one of 2 raids I've killed current bosses on Mythic difficulty, I found the raid to be incredibly accessible and even found most of the bosses very fun and interesting. My favorite boss was the Primal Council for the absolute insanity that 4-target cleave is for most classes that I play. And on the other hand, I would say my least favorite boss is probably Dathia, because she just felt boring compared to the rest. And it was very difficult for the group comp we had on Heroic in terms of interrupts. I think Razageth was an incredibly fun and heart-pounding fight on Heroic, and she provided a nice challenge that made the kill satisfying by the time my guild eventually downed her. Now, I didn't go into too much detail here, but if that's something that would interest people, let me know and I'll make it happen. Regardless, the first raid of Dragonflight was a strong one for me, and I hope Aberrus continues the trend. So, Season 1 had many ups and downs, although they were mostly ups for me. Some things bothered me, some things I loved overall, and I had a great time with this season, and hope Season 2 is just as exciting for me. And to all of you watching, I appreciate you checking the video out, and I hope you choose to stick around for more review, reaction, and gameplay content in the future.